So let's dive into a pretty provocative argument. What happens when my truth becomes the only truth? Today we're going to unpack a serious philosophical challenge to the whole idea of subjective morality.
And the source material we're digging into today really doesn't pull any punches. It kicks off with this really stark statement. It immediately sets up this core tension. If every single one of us gets to define our own reality, our own honor, our own meaning, what stops the very idea of meaning from just, falling apart?
And that's the big question, right? If a purely personal moral code has some serious flaws, then what's the other option? This explainer is going to walk us through the source's very specific, and I've got to say, very provocative answer.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the problem with my truth. Then we'll explore the whole nature of human experience, and then dive into the source's proposed standard before we wrap up with one last really challenging question.
All right, first up, let's really get into the source's main critique here. What is the actual problem with everyone just making up their own moral code based on whatever they decide is their own higher power?
You can really see the two sides of the coin here. On one side, you've got morality coming from inside you. You get to define what words like honor or family mean to you. But on the other side, there's this idea of an external, objective standard, where those same words have a fixed, universal meaning for everyone.
And according to the source, this is where a huge problem comes up. I mean, think about it. If a dishonorable person can just redefine the word honor to fit whatever they did, then what's to stop the most powerful or even the most deceitful people from forcing their definitions on everybody else? The argument is that without a common standard, meaning itself just becomes a power struggle.
Okay, next the argument goes even deeper. It takes on this really common idea that our most powerful experiences, our feelings, are basically just irrational and they're beyond any kind of real definition or control.
Love, hate, honor, beauty. We tend to think of these as super personal, right? But the source makes a really bold claim here. For any civilization to actually work, it has to figure out a way to define and even control these experiences. You can't just leave them up to individual whims.
And this leads to a fascinating counter-argument. Maybe your private, inner feeling of heartbreak isn't the most universal thing about it. The source is suggesting that the language we use to talk about that pain, the shared ideas and stories we all have about it, that might actually be more universal than the raw emotion itself. Pretty interesting thought.
The argument also pushes back hard against a simple might makes right kind of world. It makes the point that power isn't just about who's physically strongest. Someone who can twist language or who holds some kind of secret knowledge can have just as much control. The source even has a name for the belief that your personal view is the only one that matters. It calls it a solipsistic argument, which basically means you're trapped in your own head.
Now, to really understand the solution that this source is building towards, we have to get super precise with its vocabulary. It draws a huge distinction between three words we kind of throw around all the time: faith, trust, and belief.
So in this framework, faith is defined as something you don't argue your way into. It's presented as an absolute truth that just is, beyond any need for proof. You can think of it like this. Faith is a state of being. It's constant, unchanging, while reason is always in a process of becoming, always trying to figure things out.
Trust, on the other hand, is completely grounded in our physical world. It's that feeling you get from your experiences with other people, mixed with the stories you tell yourself about those interactions. It's subjective, and it's based on evidence, even if that evidence is just your own gut feeling.
And finally, we've got belief. The source actually says this is the weakest of the three. Belief is what we do when we just don't know something for sure. We basically imagine an answer. Now that can be useful, maybe it's even a survival instinct, but it's also seen as dangerous because it isn't tied to physical experience or to that absolute truth we talked about.
Okay, so with all those definitions laid out, we've finally arrived at the absolute core of this whole argument, the source's answer to the problem of subjective morality.
The source basically throws down this gauntlet. If everyone is just making up their own moral standard, then what are we judging it by? What's the external yardstick we're using to see if that code is any good? Is it just a vibe?
And here it is, the answer the source provides, plain and simple. It puts forward Christianity not as just one standard among many, but as the standard. It's presented as the ultimate objective framework for morality, something that supposedly exists before and after any personal codes, acting as the bedrock against which all other moral systems are measured.
And this is where it all clicks into place. This claim connects directly back to that very specific definition of faith we just went over. The argument isn't based on a logical proof you can debate. It's an assertion of faith. It's presented as a statement of being, a truth that is said to exist beyond the whole realm of reason.
Now, the source anticipates some pushback here, so it lays out a few rebuttals. To the idea that the faith has been corrupted, the response is that bad people can do bad things under any flag. That doesn't make the core truth invalid. To the critique that it erodes local cultures, the source points out that we're in a global system now, and any faith could face corruption. And finally, blaming the religion for every bad act done in its name, that's dismissed as a straw man argument.
So, to wrap this all up, the source ends on this really fascinating kind of meta note. It turns the camera around, away from morality, and points it at the very act of writing and sharing ideas. You know, kind of like what we're doing right now.
A pretty sharp distinction is made here. When you write for yourself, it's about getting your own head straight. But the second you start writing for other people, the claim is that you are always trying to organize their thoughts. There's an inherent goal to influence.
And that leads us to the source's final and, I think, very challenging question. If sharing your ideas is an attempt to organize someone else's mind, what's your ethical duty there? Is it actually irresponsible to share your own confusion, to put your own self-reflection out there and potentially inflict that same confusion onto somebody else? It's a heavy thought to end on.